Welcome to the week 8 lecture, where today we're essentially just going to be chatting a little bit more about React.js. Last week we spent some time getting a feel for it, doing some basics, and today we're going to be trying to, dig into that a little bit more and play around with a little bit more. The two things that I'd like to go through today, we'll see how much time we need, is to make a little example project with React that kind of mimics what I did with 1531, so we can get a bit of a feel for JavaScript and how to manipulate data. And let me just shut this window. And secondly, make a little bit of a start on the actual assignment 3, so you can see how you might actually start assignment 3, because I know, like all assignments, the hardest part's starting. So what I want to show you today is how we can build a leaderboard. And what I mean by that is a number of you, specifically the undergrads, probably did COMP6080 under me, just because of how long I've been teaching it. And I'm just trying to find something for you. Where is it? And what we're going to do today is try and actually generate like a leaderboard for some results. So what happens in 1531 at the moment is that it's a course, it's a first year course, is that students have a project, right? And they have to implement a solution, and we run tests that we wrote against their solution. And what we do is we want to rank them on a leaderboard together so that we can actually see how they all go, and we give them aliases. And I'm just trying to find for you the specific file that has that information. So here's a really good example of how you can use React to build a simple application really quickly. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you where a particular file is that's of interest to us, and I'm just trying to find it for you. I won't lie, I just forgot about this particular thing. I think it's in, yeah. So there's an actual file on the internet. This is publicly accessible in the internet. That's essentially the result of the auto marker for a 1531 project. And I can find that if I go to 21t3, this URL, iteration1.csv. And when I go to that, it downloads this iteration1.csv file, right? It's a CSV file. Nothing crazy particular. If I try and open it, I get this. This is what I get open on my computer. It's a CSV file that has a whole bunch of different things. It has a group name, it has a git commit hash, and it has a few different marks. In these cases, the marks are for the students' tests running against their own tests, our tests running against the students' tests, and the third one is their final mark, and the fourth one is their rank. So we essentially have this information, right? Like, it's been produced by like a Python shell program, and what's missing here is that we don't have a front end for it. We just have the CSV, and it's kind of boring to give the CSV to students, right? Like, download this CSV. We want to build like a fun, vibrant front end. So this is a great example of where you might actually, use a React app. So let's build one quickly. I'm going to make one just in this folder, npx create React app, and I'm going to call it leaderboard. Don't know where my phone is. So this is gonna install create React app for us. Pretty relaxed. And what's one of the first things we're going to do? Well, when you think about what a leaderboard is, like an Excel spreadsheet, we're basically making a web page with a table that displays some data. So there's probably two big challenges we have here. One is the fetching and the processing of data. Number two is the displaying of the table. Let's actually start with the displaying of the table, because sometimes that's a good place to start. Now, I now have a project here called leaderboard, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to Google React.js table. Now, if you Google this, some of the first things you'll notice are that there's some libraries to do with a particular module that we've been talking about called Material UI, and there's lots of different front-end modules. So the point with React is that rather than go and have to like make your own tables and style them, there are these kind of component libraries, we call them, like Material UI, where someone's already done this for us. And we can actually make these really nice tables. There's a whole bunch of different stuff in Material UI that's also been covered in the CSS React lecture. So let's actually use Material UI here, and I'm going to go to the Getting Started guide for Material UI and look at the installation. And it says that if I have yarn, I can install this. So I'm just going to go to my React project here, and I'm just going to copy and paste that in, and it's going to do a whole bunch of installs for me. And I'll wait a sec for it to finish. And it should be pretty quick. Cool, so I've got that finished. Now what I want to do is I want to start up my project. So yarn start, and this is going to bring it up on the port that I want it to, localhost 3000. Might bring this window over here. And this window, well, I don't need that window. Localhost 3000, and there's my React app. So what's one of the first things I'm going to want to do with this React app is I'm going to want to try and actually use this table. Now the cool thing about component libraries like Material UI is you can actually look at the source code. So you see something like this and you say, wow, that looks really nice. And then you can go and grab the source code of it. Or if you want a data table like this, you can grab the source code, or a dense table, or a sorting and selection. And it's like, oh, sorting sounds good. I don't really want the selection part. Sticky header. These all look good, but these are all the same table. These are essentially just the same table with different properties. So you can often kind of start with a really simple table. In fact, I really liked that sticky header table. I thought it was a bit stylish, so I'm going to go and look at that code here. And I'll probably just grab all of this stuff here. Yep. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my text editor. I'll have to open it in a particular folder. Give me a sec. Open folder. Where did I save this? Oh, sorry, I was looking in the wrong place. Yep, I got my leaderboard up here. I'll pull this on the screen. There's my thing. I've got my source file, my app.js. That's my main file. I can change it, learn React, blah, blah, blah. It updates that. I'm just going to go and replace this whole component, and I should be able to get a table. See if it works. Okay, it didn't quite like that. I might refresh the page. There we go. So there's our table. Now this only works because I installed the Material UI library. If I didn't install that library, then when all of these different things would go to get loaded here, it just wouldn't work. So let's actually dissect what's going on here. We've got this nice little table with all these different data items in it, and let's have a look at how this works. Well, we've got our imports up here. Now we have our columns. This is the code that actually specifies, what the different columns are and what the data is in them, and that makes sense. I got name, ISO code, population, size, density. Let's get rid of size just to see what happens. Okay, cool. So that's how I control my columns. I've got a function here called create data. I've got a whole bunch of rows that are adding the data. Okay, and then I've got my actual functional component here. And you can see that this functional component, let me change this syntax to be something more gentle. This functional component you can see is made up of a paper, whatever that is. That must be a Material UI library, a table container, a table head, a table row. You can see that we're doing a looping render here. We're getting the columns list, because that's the list, and we're going over each item, and then for each column we're creating a table cell, which makes sense. And then we, label, align, min, width, and then we have our table body here, and then for each row we're going and generating lots of different things. So this is really interesting because you can see that the rows here, there's this whole create data thing, but like essentially rows itself is just a list of lists. So I could actually create my own list here that says A, B, 3, 4, I guess, like that. No? What's wrong with this? Oh, it's a dictionary. It's a list of like objects. So I have to say here, I have to say like, name is A, code is B, population is 1, size is 2, and density is 3. Okay, so there you go. There's the table. So now you can see, now I'm starting to feel in control here because I can understand that I've copied this code sample and I've essentially just got a list of columns here, I've got a list of rows here, and then I have a functional component that's actually just doing all the stuff. And I'm not too worried about how this works at the moment because it seems to just be behaving. So, you know, we'll see how it goes. George has said, is it okay to use Material UI/lab? It's alpha code, but it contains certain things I need. You can use pretty much any library, any like component library you can use as long as it can be installed with like Yarn. That's all. Because we're just going to be, you know, just using a standard stable version of Yarn and the npm libraries to download your stuff. So if you can Yarn at it, then you're all good. So now I've got this nice little table here, but what do we want our table to have? Well, if we go back to the CSV, I've got, again, a name, a commit, 3 things, and then a rank. So I'm going to have to put these in here. I've got my group name, call this one group name. I've got the git commit. I'll call this one commit, and then I've got, what do I got? I've got mark, 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 and then rank. So these are numbers. So these ones are all strings, right? Name, label, cool. Looking at this one, ID, density, min, width, align right, format, to fix. That's just trying to decimal place it. I don't think we need any of that. Let's just try and actually put these in. So, you know, we have like your test, your code. I'll just give this, you know, your test, your code. We have another one that's like our test, your code. Label is your test, our code. Oops. Our test, your code. And then the last one was, I should say, you know, final, overall, maybe I'll call that one overall mark. And then we have your rank at the end. So we'll try that. Let's see what this gets us. Okay, so this gets us a pretty big table here. Group name, git commit, your test, your code, our test, your code, overall rank. That's pretty good. Now, one thing, though, that's important here is that with the rows, I actually want to populate this via a fetch. So I'm actually probably going to need to do some kind of fetch somewhere. And when you're building a functional component inside of like a JavaScript file, you always want to, where you can, put any data that's going to be dynamic inside the actual component itself. So you see here, I've got my like const rows here. It's a list of something. However, because that's going to get updated with what's in the fetch, I want to actually create my own state variable for that, right, too. So, you know, const rows, set rows, and to start off, it's going to be an empty list, right? And then we populate it. So, for instance, here I could say set rows, except this isn't very good React at all because, remember, everything inside a function gets called every time the state re-renders. And what do you know about what happens when you call a set function is it re-renders the state. So this one's actually creating an infinite loop because the setting rows, by you trying to set the state, it triggers a re-render, which means the function runs again, which triggers a re-render, etc. Now, if you've actually watched the lectures up to this point, and you've watched the use effect lecture in week 5, you know that one way to get around this problem is to actually use the React use effect hook. And the React use effect hook takes in a function of work that it does, and it takes in a capture list where it basically says, I will run once and any time anything in this list changes. But since we're giving it an empty list, it means it will only run once at the start and then it'll never run again. So this is that kind of shorthand, hacky way of saying, I want you to run once, please. So it'll run right at the start to load, and then we get that kind of application here. Now this in itself is okay, but we really want to load data from that URL I gave you before, which I seem to have lost, which was the iteration 1.csv. Where'd that file go? Data slash, no, let's try it out. CSE dot 21t3 slash data slash iteration one dot csv. So there's the actual file there. So let's actually, try and fetch that file. What do we know about fetch? Well, I could say fetch. I could give it that URL like this, and then I'll say, dot then d console.log d. So let's just see if that even works. Open up the console, refresh the page. Okay. Why? Oh, there we go. There's some stuff. Connection refused. Oh, is that not a valid file? Well, let's check that out. Let's see what happens when we try and access that on the internet. Looks like we're going to get a not valid file. Sometimes it's because I got the data file wrong. Sometimes, okay, that was it. So it needed to be that specific cgi.cse. It's just some kind of quirks with the URL. Yep, and then I refresh that, and there's our response. Now we know that from a response object, we sometimes want to get the body. And how do we get the body? Well, we can just say, then D or S or R for response, or rest probably for response, rest.text, like that, because we want to get the text dot then text console log text. Oops, no semicolon. Okay, so we've just got the CSV on the console, right? Now we could actually try and parse the CSV if we wanted to. Now, thankfully, a CSV is just text, so like there isn't actually a lot of parsing. Like you don't really need a CSV parse. You could actually just use JavaScript for this. So what I mean by that is that once we get the text we want, let's actually parse it. And for that, I mean we're going to go through every row. How are we going to go through every row? Well, it's like, oh, sheesh. Well, maybe we can split up. We can split it up by row. So text.split and then give it a new line. See what this console logs. See if we can actually break this up into a list. Okay, this seems to work. This is a list, and then there's one row here to there. Okay, so this seems to work. So now we've kind of got rows. So I could say here, const rows equals text.split. All right. Now I could say for a const row of rows, const items equals row.split, split by comma, and now let's console log items. So now we should have been able to extract all the individual items. There you go. So there's all the actual rows. This is fetching, and now it's breaking up that data for us. This is nice. We're nearly there. Now we want to set the items. So I've already got this little function here to set the rows. So instead of console logging these items now, I just simply need to populate them, right? So what do we have? Well, we have name, which is like, row 0. We have code, which is row 1. Well, actually, sorry, I changed all of these, right? We got name, we got commit. I might need to change this one to use underscores. We have your test, your code, which we know is like row 1. Oh, sorry, row 2. We have our test, your code, which we know is row 3, overall and rank. Like that. Row 4 and row 5. So now we've kind of extracted those 5 things out and we're putting it into this little dictionary and we're passing it into set rows, right? And now what do we get? Huh. Appears to be blank. Does anyone know why it appears to be blank? This is very strange. I mean, I know why it's blank. Any ideas why it's blank? Yep, so there's a couple things here. One is that row itself is just a string. I split it up into items, so this should be items. That's going to help solve some of our problems. We still have another problem here though. What's actually going wrong here? Only ran once. So Raymond says that it only run once. Well, that's not really a problem because we're okay with it only running once. Like all things, you can figure them out pretty quickly just by doing some printing. So if I console log here, it's console log rows. Let's see what we get. What do you notice about this? This is the hint. Has anyone figured it out? I'll give you 30 more seconds to see if someone figures it out. Yeah, okay, so Wang, Yukin Wang, I'm not sure if, which one's your first name, sorry, but it's pretty much nailed it. So what's happening here is every single time we loop through that CSV file, we're calling set rows every time, and we're setting rows to be just a list with one item in it. So how do we get around this? Well, we can do it a couple of ways. One is that we could do it with the spread operator and say, I want you to set rows to be the value of, like I'll show you this way, right? I'll say, you know, new rows, and I'll say const new rows equals the old rows, right? Because the spread operator is how you kind of create a list with all the components of rows. And then you could say new rows dot push and then like add that in. I just want to push my new dictionary into it. That's like one way, I guess you could try and do it. Will this work? Will this be okay? Let's see what this does. Okay, that seems weird. What's wrong here? I mean, it's kind of like the obvious problem here is that I've reused variables, which I shouldn't, right? I'll call this one like fetch rows or something, so we don't get lost reusing it. Okay, now still some problems. Maybe we're still using this the wrong way. See, now this is really tricky because remember the problem is that every single time you call a set function, like set rows, it's going to trigger a state update. So if you're trying to do this for every single row, you're going to run into a problem, right? So you do need to actually kind of bulk these up. So here I might say, you know, all new rows equals an empty list. And then I'll go through this and then I'll just push to this new list I'm making here. You know, like that. And then once all of that looping's done, now I'll set that to be all new rows. So we actually kind of build up this big list and then update it, and there you go. There's our finished kind of application. A table like that. You know, you can see everyone's marks like that. You can see their different ranks. So really, really powerful stuff. And I want you to reflect on just how little code I wrote to make this happen. Like we wrote extremely little code to bring this to life, which is very exciting. Sam says, what if the object you want to update is complex? Will slice ... work? Yeah. So the spread operator, inside the square brackets works fine. It's just this scenario was problematic because of how we were trying to we didn't want to call it every single time because there was like so many different rows. Yeah, so there's a few different things you could consider here, but generally speaking, this would be fine. You know, this would be like a fine approach. Does anyone have any questions about this particular example before we maybe move on to something else? Also, to Lil Narco's question, is using SX props for styling okay? Generally speaking, we don't want students doing any kind of direct CSS styling on components. I know that some component libraries have their own kind of like style metadata, like saying, you know, this property equals 3 to represent that there's meant to be 3 spaces here or something. That's okay. We just don't want to see like any raw CSS objects being passed into components. So yeah, that's the main thing there. Sam says, so if I have an object inside an object, do we still use the spread operator? It depends what you're trying to do, Sam. I find it a very difficult question to answer generally, like as a generalization. So again, just to recap, the key things we're kind of taken away from here are that you can use Material UI to really easily get components. You can find examples online, copy and paste them, replace it, and you can see here we're using fetch to collect some data. So to the question about SX on Material UI, let me just quickly look this up. So the question about can we use SX? It depends how you use it. What we want to see in this assignment, generally, is that you aren't defining your styles in line. And where possible, you're separating out your structure, your JSX, from your styles. It's not global CSS, that's correct. Though generally speaking, what we want to see people do is actually like not have styles riddled throughout their functional component itself. So like naturally seeing, you know, 1 or 2 styles is okay, but we kind of mostly don't want to see something like this. Lil Nako says that's the way the MUI documentation says to do it. I understand that, but like, you know, the assignment itself is not specifically on, you know, we expect you to do Material UI. There's other libraries you can use, right? But the general rule being that, like, you know, as has been throughout the course, we don't want to see your styles riddled throughout your code, because this is a course on, you know, like the good science and best practice of working with like front ends generally. You know, it's not a course on using Material UI. I'd say that like more detailed, you could use a wrapper and stuff. Like a more detailed understanding of this would probably have to come just through working through some examples on the forum and stuff. And it's pretty fine to share some samples of things like this as well, and like different ways to approach it. But I'll just be really, really clear again, because I don't want to spend too much time on it in the lecture, is like the hesitation and prohibition from our end is not the use of the SX property. It's the fact that we don't want to see code that's riddled with styles in line that could be defined up the top, right? So it's like the use of creating themes here and then applying those themes is okay, you know? Because you're not just like, you're actually saying, okay, here is a particular kind of type or name for a component, and then I'm going to apply it now down here. So, for example, I mean, this is for style values specifically. It's like if you had a page, for instance, that just had like box, and you were just like the background colors, background paper, text secondary, text primary, like you were just using those themes as properties, that would be pretty okay. MX is also okay because MX is not a CSS property, it's actually a component of the library. Whereas lots of these other random properties like font weights and displays, we'd want to see you being able to abstract those out. Remember too, Sometimes you can abstract those out in a whole bunch of different ways depending on the library you're doing. I'm not going to comment on really specific things. We can chat on the forum about that. But I'm just trying to get the idea across that our main issue is with the sprawl of lots of custom styles all throughout code. And another example, for instance, is that if you have code that's really well componentized, you can probably use this property in lots. You can use SX for a lot of things because your component is so well separated into tiny files where everything's just like small little segments. Because again, the problem is big files with lots and lots of styling riddled throughout code. That's the best general answer I can give. For more specific things, it's probably worth people making some public posts on the forum for us to kind of chat through and look at together. So we'll kind of let's tackle that as we go, basically. Are there any last questions on the leaderboard example that we've done here? Otherwise, where I want to start today. Oh, can I even start? Tell me GitLab's back online. Come on, CSE. Ah, those monsters. Good thing I have a local copy of it. They're very lucky. Alright. Sorry, I'm out of control with GitLab, so I know it's a bit annoying. Let's have a look at assignment 3. I don't quite have the exact latest code, but that's okay. What I want to do today is kind of just give you a bit of a rundown with how you interact with it. So this is the assignment 3 repo. I'm sorry that I can't. You can use Axios, yes. I'm sorry that I can't pull up the README on GitLab because GitLab's down. But what I do want to show you is that we have this backend folder, we have this front end folder. How would you actually go about starting this if you haven't started it already? And it's pretty simple. In your backend folder, you got a server, which is already there. So you just need to yarn install it. You've also got a front end folder where we've run create react app for you. You can yarn in that folder to actually get things ready. And then it's just a matter of yarn starting both of these. So in the backend folder, when you yarn start, you're spooling up a server just like assignment 2. I won't spend much time with this because you should already know it from assignment 2, which gives you all of the different routes you have. And then on the front end, which is a React app, when I yarn start this one, I'm pulling up an empty React project like we've been working with all term. I think it's literally empty in this case, I guess. Let me just open, let me open the assignment. Oh, I got it up here. Yeah, it's literally empty. So I emptied it out for you. Oh, GitLab, you said GitLab's up for you, but HTTPS isn't working? I don't know. Interesting. So, or maybe the server's up and the website's down. I'm not too sure. So we've got our backend here, and it's the question of how would you actually start this kind of project? And if you read through the spec, you kind of understand that it's very similar to the Airbnb site where you can register, log in and log out. And then on top of that, you have the ability to get a whole bunch of listings, to create a listing, like you as a host. Because if you think about Airbnb, you kind of go on Airbnb. It's like a two-sided marketplace. You can sign up to Airbnb and you can book people's places, and you can also have your place booked by people. So you can go and get a list of you can go and get a bunch of all the listings on Airbnb that you might want to book. You can create your own Airbnb listing. You can go and get the contents of someone else's listing or your listing, really any listing specifically. You can update the details of an Airbnb listing if you own it. You can delete a particular Airbnb listing if you own it. And then you can also publish or unpublish an Airbnb listing because you might create one but essentially have it in a draft mode. And then also when you go and stay at someone's Airbnb listing, you can review it. So at the end of it, you can for a particular listing, actually review it based on a booking ID. And then in terms of bookings are what you do. Like, say you have 10 listings because there's 10 houses available for rent in Sydney. A booking is when you say, I'm going to go to that house and I'm going to book that for this particular date. So you can get a list of your bookings. You can create a booking. You can... oh, this one's a bit... I can't remember this exactly, whether this is your bookings or like bookings you've made or bookings other people have made for your place. You can create a new booking if you want to. So if you're a guest wanting to book someone else's, you can actually make that booking. And if you're a host with someone else trying to book yours, you can accept or decline them, and then you can also delete a particular... well, you can delete a particular booking. Now, this particular assignment, I didn't write the backend for. Our previous assignments, I wrote the backend for, so you can see there's a couple things I just don't remember right off the top of my head. But the cool thing about having these APIs is you can actually go and play with it here, you know? Like, you can actually play around with whether it works or not, how it works. You can go and try and create a booking and then delete it and see what happens. And yeah, one of the main differences with this assignment, and I wrote this in the spec in bold up the top, is that you don't have this like separation that I guess you had with the Slack app, where it was like you were logged out or you're logged in, because the Airbnb is like the Airbnb site, whereby you can access things whilst not logged in. It's just if you're not logged in, you can't create listings or delete listings or update listings or book anything. You know, you can just see stuff. So it's a lot like Airbnb in that way. And that's probably one of the biggest conceptual differences. The other kind of conceptual challenge that you're all going to face, if you haven't faced it already, is the fact that some of these routes pertain to behavior that you would do as a host, and some of these routes would pertain to behavior you would do as a guest. But let's just get started with this so we can kind of learn together how we might go about, you know, this particular process. So if I'm starting this off and I know that I don't need to log in to get something, one of the very first things I want to do is create like a bit of a home page, or like a slash listings page. And again, I don't have the spec up, so like I might do something slightly off. So Raymond says, oh, damn it, I made it so that you had to be logged in. Thankfully, it's actually not too bad to change that, because naturally there's going to be a check. Are you logged in? All you have to do is relax that check. So if anyone has gone down that route and didn't see that part of the spec, I don't think it's too bad. I think it's pretty easy to salvage. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have a few different pages. My home page is going to be my listings page, you know, like, or like I'll call it like a listings list. So whenever you want to make it like a new screen, it's a great idea to make your own component for it. So here I'll create like a listings list like this. And one sec, let me just... Yeah, great. So here I'm going to create like a listings list, which is like a component, and I want to actually import it. Now, what I'd recommend you generally do is that I think a great approach, and you don't have to do this, like I'm not going to tell your tutors they need to mark you like this. It should be organized, but a good way I think to organize your files is to break things up into components and pages. So I'm going to create a new folder called components, and I'm going to create a new folder called pages. Now, every time I do this, I have to restart my text editor because of Windows subsystem and how that doesn't work too well, so bear with me for a sec. But we're not going to make too many files, so this should be pretty doable. You know, so now I've got my front end, in my front end folder I have my source, I've got my pages and components. I'm going to make a new page which we wanted to call listings list. So I'm going to make a new one called listingslist.jsx, and here I'm going to import it. So import listings list from did I call it pages? I meant to call it screens, but it doesn't really matter. Like, typically, everything's a component in React, right? It doesn't matter what it is. Everything's just components of components. They're all the same type of component. It's just some components kind of refer to big overarching screens, and other components kind of refer to smaller things like buttons, right? So here I'll say, like, pages slash listing list. So I might import that particular thing here, and I can try this out. What's the export default? How's it go again? Return test. I think that's the default. Import React from React is usually a good thing to import everywhere. Let's see what this looks like. Oh, I've already got some linting errors. That's okay. Whole bunch of trailing white space. Let's tackle these together. And then here, what have I got? Component definition is missing display name. Oh no, it wants a, listings list. Does it want this? Line 3, listings list is not defined. Oh, we could make it, const listing list, export default listings list. We could do it like this if we want. Tab character, this is just me and my crappy editor. Expected 2 spaces, new line required at end of file. There you go, all good now. So I've got my listings list page here. Now if I want to collect all the listings from the API, what can I do here? Well, I can try and fetch. Now what do we know about fetching is generally you're probably going to want to use a use effect for many of your fetches. So I'm going to try and do that here. I'll say, react.useEffect. Let's just keep it really simple to start. I want to do a fetch, and that fetch is going to go to http //localhost 5005 /listings. Now I'll clean this up after. And my .then, it's a GET request, so I could probably leave it like that for now. And then I know I have to do JSON on it, so I'm going to, rr.json, and then I'll do .then. Data, and then I'll just console log that data. So this can be like a starting point for our little React project, just to see how it goes. And I've still got my tabs problem. There we go. Let me just fix up my tabs. Okay, test, and then a console. What do I got here? Listings array is empty. Okay, I have empty listings. We could try and create our own listing. That's fun. Maybe we can do that too. So where this particular assignment differs is that I don't think we give you much test data. So you can actually look at the backend folder yourself. And similar to the last assignment, you will see that there's this database.json file. And there's actually nothing here. If you'd like to, you can all share some of your own databases on the forum if you'd like to. Because as you create some, you'll actually see how it behaves. So what we might actually do is let's actually make ourselves another component called listing create. Okay, so now I'm going to go to my pages folder. I'm going to go to my listings list. I might just copy and paste this. I'll call it listing create.jsx. And on this one, I'll copy out the fetch for now. And I'll replace this with create. And I'll change this to create. And I don't know what it's complaining about. Oh, did I import that? Oh, sorry. And yep, and then it's annoyed because expected exception block space or tab after. Yeah, so a lot of comments in linters will expect space before the start. So okay, now I've got this whole create thing. My app is like listings create, whatever. So it's actually showing both. So this is actually the first component and this is the second. But the thing is, I want those to be on different screens because they're different processes. So this is where I need to have a look at React Router DOM, which is the most popular way of managing URLs when it comes to your web page. And I'm just literally going to copy this in because there's a good example on W3 Schools here. I'm going to copy this whole chunk of code like this. And I'll go and copy this import up here. So this import imports a whole bunch of components from React Router DOM. Now this will break because I have not yarn added it. I have to yarn add it. So I'm going to have to stop my React server. And I'm going to yarn add React Router DOM. That was quick. I was going to take a 5-second break. Oh, I'm tired. Alright, so now we have this. I refresh again. Failed to compile. I've added a whole bunch of code here that has some linting problems. The way the router works is pretty simple. You have a router which says that everything inside of me is a page, is a series of pages that might have different routes. Then we have some links. Links are literally just like hyperlinks in HTML, except instead of taking you to a whole new page and triggering a browser refresh, they're kind of like the links you did in assignment 2, where they just trigger a DOM update, you know, so it's like a smooth update. And we're going to have two things we want here, right? We're going to have listings. And what's the other URL? Say listing/create. I can make it up. I'm the boss. You know, listing create, or like all listings or something. Now, if I reload this page, I have to get rid of all this other crap. One sec. I'll just comment this out for now. Yep, switch is defined but never used. Oh, sure. Route. Strings must use single quotes. That's fair. That's pretty inconsistent. Trailing spaces not allowed. Where have I got trailing spaces? Line 14. Ah, yep. And expected tab or whatever before. Yeah, okay, cool. There you go. So you can actually see there's my two links up here. And when I click on those, notice the URL change. This is how we can kind of manage the URL changing here. Maybe I want to kind of put a line between that or something. If it doesn't like you doing that, you can use the HTML entity for space, NBSP. I don't actually know what it stands for, but that's non-breaking space. Yeah, so that non-breaking space just means it's a space without creating a new line. So non-breaking space there will give me a bit of space. And now I've got my like 2 pages here. That's pretty cool. You know, again, nice and simple. What I'd like to do now is display different things on those different pages. And that's where the switch comes in handy. So what the switch allows me to do is the switch allows me to say, all right, well, inside the switch, I'm going to have a bunch of routes. And each route, I'm going to specify what its URL is. And if it is that URL, I want you to load everything inside here. So if this route, for instance, is listings, in here I could say, you know, hello. And if this route, I don't actually know if this will work. And if this route is listing/create, I could here say, you know, go. That might work. So now when I click on these different things, you can see that, oh, sorry, I won't do that. You can see that it's actually loading different text. It's loading hello or go, but instead of hello or go, I actually want to give it my listings list, and I want to give it my listing create. So now we have create. When I click that, we have listing. So we can kind of move between these pages. And you can see the way React works is every single time you change this page, it rebuilds that component, and you can actually see that fetch occurring every time I click on that. And that's a really important thing about useEffect. UseEffect as a React hook is called every single time the component does what we call mounting. And mounting is whenever it's kind of generated again. So in this case, even though like it's only used once and we only loaded the web page once, we've mounted that component every single time we click back. Samir says, should we make your listings a protected route? Your listings. Maybe, or you could put it on the same route, I guess. Just give you different data. I can't remember specifically what the spec says. George says, important to not confuse router link with MUI link. Yeah, so this is a problem, is sometimes component libraries use the same names, and like a material UI link is not the same as a React router DOM link, because like there's a big difference here, just to point this out, there's a big difference between link to and a hyperlink reference equals that. Because like in the hyperlink reference case, you'll actually notice it's triggering a full page reload. See how you can kind of see everything like flashing? See, the page is being reloaded the whole time. Whereas with a link, you're actually just letting React do the DOM update seamlessly. And it's a lot kind of quicker and smoother. That's why we do something like that. So now we've got our listings list, but we don't have any listings. So let's have a look at our listings create page. We've already got a component for it. What does the API say? To make a listing, what do I need to give it? I need to give it a title, address, price, thumbnail. Well, let's just copy and paste this in here for now. So to do that, well, this one's a bit interesting. Maybe I'll use some state variables here. Maybe I'll say, you know, const title set title equals react.useState empty. And I'll do that for, you know, address. I'll do that for price, except price might start at 0, say. Thumbnail's a string, so and metadata. I might not even worry about that one yet. So I've got like those 4 things there. Now, when I actually want to make this fetch here, I could use a use effect just to try something out. Forget a button click even to start. And I could actually do a fetch on the route listing /new, and I believe the method is, well, I need some headers here, right? So I can't remember, was it HTTP fetch? Oh, I've already forgotten this because I haven't looked at it for a few weeks since the last lecture. But we need to do a couple things. We need to, we probably need to send an, I don't think we need to send an application type JSON. Oh, we do need to send an application type JSON, I think. We do need to also say what method it is. Like that, and then we also need to actually, you know, send the body and stuff. So the options I'm going to give it here are method post. Headers will be what's written there, which is the content type. It's going to be application/JSON, and then I'll send my body, which will be a stringified dump of title is title. I'm writing this out the full way so it's clear. Address is address. Price is price. And thumbnail is thumbnail. So now if I do this right, it should, in theory, send all of this empty data to the server when the page loads, because use effect will happen when the page loads. Apparently return outside of function. Oh. Set title, it's never used. Yeah. If you don't actually set things, you can actually get rid of that part. And you can just do that if you want to. Though line 13, indentation, great. Easy. Okay, invalid token. So this makes sense. So we did actually send that fetch as soon as the page loaded, but we didn't pass in a token. So it's like we need a valid token here. Now I'm pretty sure that this has been... Oh, well, I need to be logged in. Great. So sometimes you can actually use the this library if you want to try some of these things out, right? Like for instance, you can actually edit this. Can I edit this? I can't. Try it out. Yeah, I can. I can actually say, you know, Hayden at UNSW, password is just password, name is Hayden Smith, and I should actually be able to do this through the Swagger, click execute, and it actually succeeded. It gave me a 200 response with this token. So you can actually use this Swagger stuff to your advantage because it's actually dynamic. That's one of the reasons it works. So I've got my token here. Great. So I've got my token, and now I can just say, well, short authorization is bearer, and then that. There you go. So let's try this out again. Unnecessarily quoted property authorization. Fair enough. Must provide property details for the listing. So now it's annoyed because I don't think I've sent in a metadata. There you go. I got my listing ID. So I just created a listing ID. And if you go to the back end and you look at database.json, you can actually see there's the user and there's the listing ID, and the listing ID has no title because we didn't give it a title. So, you know, we're already on our way here to getting a listing or two. Now we could create another listing. I could kind of do this the fudgy way by, you know, giving it a different name like test2, and then I could just refresh the page, which has just created another listing for me, and, you know, test3. Because every time I hit save on this, React's going to hot reload the page and send the fetch again. Okay, so I've created 3 listings. Now let's go back to all listings. Well, you can see that the all listings one we had before, it's actually now just returned me a list from the fetch, which has 3 items in it, and I could try and print those out. In fact, rather than print them out, let's actually try and display them on the page. So I'll create a new state property here called listings. Set listings equals react.useState, empty list. And now when we get this back, I'll actually say, once I get the data, set the listings to be that data. Okay, now that'll work. But we're not doing anything with this listings yet. So we need to do our little loopy-loo and say, well, listings.map. Listing is a function that's going to return me some kind of HTML. I'm not sure what data's there. Listing.name potentially. Is that what there is? Yep. So that's kind of what we have to do. But also remember, when it comes to your loops, I don't think I touched on this much when we did it last time, is that you need, if you have a loop in React and you're printing out like the same thing every loop, what you need to do is you need to actually give it a key. And that key here is going to be some kind of ID, and that ID can be extracted from the map, because when you give it the mapping function, you actually can give it a value and an ID. Listings.map, not a function. Okay, so what's probably happened here is I probably haven't set something properly here. So instead of setting it, I'm going to console log it again. Let's console log the data, see what I missed. Now you can see what I've done wrong here is that the API is not returning me a list, it's returning me an object with one key in it that is called listings, and that listings has a value, which is an array. So I nearly had it before. I need to do data.listings. I expected that one to work. Why is it all... Well, let's try console logging here. Console log listing. Okay. I have all the listings there. Not sure what do we got? Oh, title. There's no name. Sorry. So this is probably actually rendering. It's probably just there's nothing there. Okay, there's the titles. That's good. The first one had no title, which, you know, you could change this around too if you want. Like if you're like, damn it, the first one had no title, you could just call it test1 and you could just restart the server. You can just edit the database directly, and there's your 3 files, right? So now you've got your 3 listings. Cool. Let's create another listing, except this time maybe just for fun. Let's enter the title and the thumbnail. You know, because that's something that's interesting to you all, no doubt. Is so here I'll create a little form that'll be like, you know, input type equals text, value equals title, on change equals, what is it, set title e.target.value, I think is the approach. I think that's the gist of it. So this should work now. If I go to listing create, okay, I've got my title there. I don't know why that, value, sorry, I did that wrong. Value should be the variable title, not the string title. And it should just be blank now. So the use state's default value should just be blank. And I'm probably, every time this page loads, because I still left it in the use effect, it's trying to create a new listing. And it's failing because it says a listing with this title already exists. So one thing I need to do here now is I actually need to have it only happen on a button trigger of some sort. So I'm going to create a button here called like create listing. And what I'll say is that when that button is clicked, so button's on click, I'm going to call a particular function called create listing, which I haven't made yet, and we can make it here. Const create listing, and we'll just do whatever the use effect was doing. You know, we'll keep it really simple. So now there's a function there that's only called when I click create listing. Got some trailing spaces. So title ABC, when I click create listing, it went and created it, because all I've done is just say, well, I'm just going to now allow the title to be updated, and when I go back to all listings, it's all there. This is like, again, this is the really cool part of React. It's like, you think back to assignment 2, right? How annoying was it when you like made a channel, but then you went back to the channels list and you had to refetch the channels list? It's like, because we have this strong declarative framework, everything's just kind of handled for us. So I might make another one called blah, blah, blah. If I go back to listings, they're all there. Great. Now let's try and do it for the thumbnail. So let's actually have a thumbnail. Now, remember that all in this course, all of the stuff we're working with is a base 64 image. Now, in your assignment, you're probably going to actually like get something uploaded from the customer, just like in assignment 2. Though in this case here, let's just grab one online. I'll go grab a base 64 image off Google. Most small Google images are not actually URL based anymore. They are just little base 64 images. These are all massive photos though. There's a small one. This one might be base 64. Let's try it out. No, that one's not. Small banana. Most of the time Google does this to like save load time. That's really boring. Small banana icon. These will probably be like tiny. They're all so big. I feel like every time I look up images, they're always tiny on the internet. Let's try this one. So now this image here, the image is actually stored in the URL, right? So now what I'm going to do is when I create my like banana listing and I give it a thumbnail, I'll just paste in this. Now for your assignment, you're probably going to want to convert an uploaded file to a base 64 yourself. And Lil Narco says, can we use the same function you provided with as an assignment too? You can. I can't tell you whether you'll need to do anything to it because I just don't remember, but you can use it, reuse it for sure. That's totally fine. So now I've got my base 64 image, so when I create that listing and I go to my database.json, you can actually see there it is there. It's been saved. Bit worried about the color of it, but that's okay. So now when I actually go to load my listings, why don't we actually try and display the thumbnail as well? So what I'll do here is that every listing, I'll say, let's actually put like a horizontal line between all the listings or something. Yep, like that. This looks like a blank listing by accident. Whoops. And then it's not just that, but let's also include the listing.thumbnail. There you go. Now the problem with this is that most of these listing thumbnails are 0, which is bad. I should really change them to be like an empty string. Let me just do that manually here. And restart the server. So an empty string. So what I'm going to do here instead is that as part of that div, I might just do an image source, right? Because image source will take in a base 64 value and display an image. So there's my banana. So, you know, that's kind of the process around this stuff. Now, I'd love to hear some questions. Let's take a 5-minute break because it is 7:10 and I've been running you for a while. And we'll get back to it at 7:15. And yeah, please ask some questions because I'll answer them when we get back. So let's take a 5-minute break. Hey everyone, welcome back from the break. So George asked over the break, do we need to use progress bars for image upload? No, I think that's a cool bonus feature or a cool UI UX thing, but you're right, because it's all local, it's never going to be slow, so it's probably like a waste of effort. Still cool though. But yeah, so where we left off was like what I was trying to demonstrate in the last lecture was like sometimes we make requests to the server with a use effect, typically gets. We do a lot of gets with a use effect. We make a lot of posts with some kind of function that's called on like a JSX on click. We can make components and break them up into like pages and components. Components would be more things like, you know, a nav bar or, you know, listing icon or stuff you reuse in multiple other components. Basically, if you think of your app as a series of pages or screens made up of components, and those components are made up of components, and those components are made up of components, etc. The other thing I wanted to highlight was just, you know, a bit of a reminder about loop rendering, you know, fetches and stuff. I think also just to really emphasize here, in assignment 3, we are comfortable with you using async await. So you can actually now make this function here async, and instead you can actually just do this if you want to. You can say, you know, like const r equals await fetch, and then you can say, you know, const data equals await r.json, and you can do stuff like this now if you want, if you find it, you know, kind of easier to conceptualize, because that could be a little bit cleaner for you. Yuan says, I'll work backwards. For storing global variables, local storage and use effect. For storing global variables, local storage and use effect, which one is preferred out of local storage and use effect? You mean use context? It depends on what it is. Like, if you need to store a property that needs to exist beyond sessions, as in if you need it to exist when the page refreshes, local storage is probably the place to go, you know? If you don't need it to exist beyond sessions, but you want it to just be accessible everywhere in your app within a single kind of page load, I would look at the use context example that we gave you, because I think if you set it up right, it takes a little bit to set up, but then it's just like you can kind of reuse it properly. I would say though, again, the nature of how React and stuff works is that a lot of the time, most of the time, you don't need global variables. Just sometimes, probably the one obvious example would be a token, but tokens you'd probably store in local storage anyway. I actually don't know what else you would need to store globally besides a login token. There'd probably be something, but largely you can get away with it. And maybe because you're only storing one other thing, it might just be easier to put it in local storage, you know, instead of putting it in use context or something. So, yeah, and then to your other question, Yuan, which I think is really good, and I should really get to that. Could you show us how to pass props into components without triggering Eslint errors? Absolutely. A really great example of how you might do that is a thumbnail here. So with this loop, I'm going to actually take this like component, which is my like listing, and I'm going to break it up into its own component here, which I'll call, you know, I'll call it like listing box.jsx, right? Const listing box is a functional component, export default, listing box, import React from React, and then, you know, here what we'll say is, you know, we'll just say return this. Oops, all my tabs and stuff are out of whack. Sorry. Yep. Yeah, return that, and then in our listings we'll say, you know, import a listing box from components / listing box, like that. Oops. Yeah, so now we've imported that. So now what I'm going to do is, when I'm looping through this, I'm actually going to load a component. So this is like the cool componentized composition nature of React here, where I could even get rid of this just for a second so we can demonstrate the point, and say, you know what, all I'm actually going to return here is hello, like this. Oops. And then it's going to complain here, and it's going to say unexpected token, because I can't write code. That should work. I don't know why that's not working. What's the problem? Unterminated regular is it the comment? Surely it's not the comment. Oh, it is the comment. What's wrong with this comment? Why is that comment not working? Why is that? Oh, maybe it doesn't like... Oh, right. Sorry. It's just how React works. It won't let you break into JavaScript code inside of parentheses. So clearly I've got some other problems here. Nested block is redundant. Man, it really doesn't like that block. I'm just to delete it. So yeah, I've got my hellos here, right? So now we've got this loop, and every time it loops, we're actually just kind of composing another component here. However, we want to pass things into this component, right? We actually don't want it to just say hello. We want it to return the divs we created before. But those divs take in some properties. So how do we deal with that? Well, it takes in two properties at the moment. One is title, the other is thumbnail. So this is how you can have things passed into your own, component here. And here I'll just say title, and here I'll say thumbnail. And we can test if those are being passed in correctly by just putting them in here. Title equals hi, or, title equals hi, thumbnail equals hi. Doesn't really matter. And then, here, same thing, blank line, title is missing and props validation. So this, and the ID. Whoops, forgot that one. Oh, I don't think we need that. Let me come back to that one. That one's a little less important at the moment. Yeah. So these are two errors that many of you would have run into and are really important. Title is missing and props validation. What this is, again, I mentioned this last week, is that there's a library in React called prop types, which is a makeshift way of doing some really basic type checking on props, because props are one of the most basic ways that you have errors in these untyped or loosely typed languages. And the point here is that when you create a functional component that has props being passed into it, right, like this, what you need to do is you actually need to say, hey, for that listing box component, there's three properties there, and I'm going to tell you what types they are. The title is a prop types.string. The thumbnail is a prop types.string. And by telling React this, it's able to say, great. And this is really good because it means that during runtime, or I think probably during compile time even more, it's able to sanity check for you that you're actually using it correctly, which is really important. So anytime you pass props in, you're going to need to do this as well. Now that key thing I mentioned before, you could pass the ID into the component here. However, what's probably more prudent is that you actually just keep the ID outside of the component, because the component itself probably doesn't care what the ID of it is. It probably just wants to compile. That's all it wants to do. It doesn't really care about what the ID is. So you could do this here and kind of wrap that component you're passing in. And then here you could pass in listing.title and listing.thumbnail. And then we get that. Now remember too, you can destruct objects anywhere in JavaScript. So here, I don't need to call this listing. I could actually replace this with title and thumbnail if I wanted to keep my code even kind of simpler in how it's written. So instead of listing here, I actually specify the properties I want to get from that listing. Now Chen has said, could I set React prop types to 0 in ESLint? No, you can't, because it's just not the rules. And I mean, I know what happens. I say this, and then a student's like, God, that's annoying. And it's like, I don't know, like, I know it's annoying for you, but it's like, what's going to happen when you go work on every other project in the world and someone else tells you what style needs to be, and you're not going to say, I don't like it, let's get rid of it. They're going to be like, who are you? So, it's just like one of those things. Take it as a challenge or an opportunity to, like, get used to something you're not comfortable with, right? Like, there's been lots of style changes that I used to be very opinionated about that I've since just been like, this is not the rules, So that particular one, prop types to 0, we probably wouldn't allow. In the case of regex, George, I think if there's like 1 or 2 regex lines, you could probably comfortably ESLint ignore them out. And in general, like, we're okay if students want to use like the ESLint ignore directive on a few lines of code. It's just your tutors will be looking at your code, and if they see it used more than a few times, they're going to probably dock your marks, right? So for things like regex, it's fine. Regex isn't really, kind of core to the understanding of what we're doing. Yeah, so that's really it. So this whole project is really just like a lot of this kind of, but tying all these components together. One thing I will point out about the backend that I think is really important. The backend is not a robust system. It is not designed defensively. It is not designed thoroughly. It is designed purely to assist you. And this is really important because sometimes, like, if you feed the backend garbage, it will take garbage a lot of the time because, again, we didn't build this to be a robust system to protect you from yourself. We built it as a tool because applications like Airbnb simply need a backend. You have multiple users. You can't do it all in one session, right? So you just need a backend. So it's the minimum viable backend to exist to allow us to assess you. So just when you use it, don't be surprised if you can pass in an empty title or something, because we're expecting you to try and put in that validation or make sure it works. In the real world, you tend to have validation on the front end and the back end, but in this kind of assignment, it's like most validation happens on the front end. The only validation that really happens in the back end is stuff that would break it. Like, you can't create a user with the same email because that just would violate, the invariance or whatever the fuck. Oops, sorry. Damn it, swore the first time this time. Whatever the hell it is, maybe it was the first time. Hope it was the first time. Whatever it is, it's just like, it would break the back end, so we don't allow that to happen. Now, I'm pretty much at the end of my leash in terms of what I wanted to run through today, really. We could keep going on and on and on with different stuff, but I had 4 examples there that we could run through in the lecture slides, but largely I was just like, I just want to go through it until I feel like we've covered everything, because I had a few different things, which was like assignment 3 and the leaderboard. These 2 things are interesting, but they're all just the same kind of stuff with React, use effect, fetches, and everything else. Is there any other questions people have today? Because we're pretty much just going to wrap up now once there aren't any more questions from you. You still got lots of time to do assignment 3. We have given you 4 weeks with it, so you still got you've got another 2 weeks and 2 days, which is a huge amount of time, which is really good. Yuan says, when I use button to switch between pages, can I use button href attribute, or do I have to use link to wrap the button? I don't know the specific component. I don't want to comment on the specific component. All I'll tell you is that it shouldn't refresh the page. Typically, href attributes do refresh the page. You can tell because when you refresh the page, a few things happen. You see the loading bar up the top tends to do the little spinny spin. So, or say this page, when I refresh it, you'll see that little thing up here does the spinny spin. Or when I refresh this page, it does the spinny spin. Or when I have the console here, the console tends to flash and then reappear, like this. Whereas when, you click through the page, you can actually see when they've used single page app because the console is not refreshing. So these are not like refreshing the page, these are just manipulating the DOM. Raymond has pointed out a good thing. I think you use history. Actually, yeah, that's one thing. Let me quickly chat about that because the history library is really important. How do you do redirects is a really interesting idea. There's a bunch of different ways to do it, but just to demonstrate the point here, the app I've created with you here, it doesn't... What happened to the server? Why is the server not working? Oh, okay, whatever. It doesn't have a home page. If you try and go to this URL, it like breaks. Now there's... Oh, that's why it wasn't working. What actually happens is that this page still loads, but because there's no route, none of these components get loaded. There's ways you can tweak with that, but let's say for a second, I'll just show you something fun. Is if you say route path equals /, put this one at the end, by the way, if you do this, and then route, I might actually want to redirect it. So I want to say redirect to /listings. But how do you do that? It's really hard with React because it's declarative, you can't really just like do a DOM manipulation. So typically, to do a redirect, it's really, like there's a few different ways you can do it. But it's really strange with React because what you'll typically do is have a component that returns a redirect component, which I think is kind of a bit peculiar, but you get used to it. And the redirect component also doesn't actually do a full page refresh either. It does a DOM shift. So there's a redirect component inside the React Router DOM library. And what it does is that when this component tries to load and render, it actually will just redirect the page somewhere else. And that's where you can kind of get something like this. So there's other ways you can handle this. But, you know, I talked about it in my tute this week. So if you want to go watch my tute, I think I talked about the params and the use history in a bit more detail. I'd probably recommend maybe checking out the last 20 minutes of the tute I recorded this week. If you feel like you need help with the URL parameters and history and stuff. Well, mainly the URL parameters, I think, was the key thing that I talked about. Yeah, like I did like the wildcard stuff. So Raymond says, I tried redirect, but it had an error that it needed to be wrapped in a browser. You'll have to share that post on the forum, but typically redirects won't work if they're not like inside a router, I think, too. Yeah, so like most kind of React Router DOM components want to exist inside the router tag, but that's doable if your router tag kind of is wrapped around your entire application. Yeah. Cool. Any other questions today? Use history is an acceptable way of redirecting, yes. I mean, honestly, anything that works is probably going to be an acceptable way of like, anything that redirects you without refreshing the page is going to be an acceptable way to redirect, is probably what I'd say. Yeah, there's a few different ways to like get the same outcome, you know, as you may have noticed. Okay, I mean, that's kind of all I have for today. I don't want to take up people's time who are hanging around if there aren't any more questions. What I'll say is, if you have more questions, please post on the forum. I'm always there to help. We got tutors to help. It'll be a fun 2 weeks. We'll be through it in no time, and you'll be through 75% of your assessment. So we're still chatting next week. There's still an hour next week, which we can use all or none of it to talk about assignment 3. And we'll have a guest lecture for the first hour next week too. So, yeah. Thanks, everyone. I hope you have a great evening. Really appreciate you coming along and listening in. Hope you learned something. I hope something was helpful. I know people on the live stream tend to be the keen beans who know a lot already, but for anyone here tonight or watching the recording, I hope it was helpful. So, thank you.